Statistically, autistic people are more likely to be unemployed than allistic people, and there are many barriers facing autistic people entering the workplace. For me personally, I used to work as a circus artist, and I found that a lot of work was distributed via like social networking or who was friends with who, and people employing people who they wanted to go on the jobs with. And that was really challenging for me because that's an area that I've always really struggled with, and that meant that I missed out on work. James, in your career path, have you ever encountered any barriers, and if so, which barriers?
Yeah, I think every time sort of my interview process begins, every time I'm going to go into a new job or I'm looking for a new role, it's just not built for autistic people. However, the process is starting to feel, when you look at it from an autistic perspective, it's definitely starting to get better from the fact that interviews are so similar. They're always the same thing over and over again. And yes, you slip up the first few times. The next one's the same thing again. And the next thing's the same thing again. And autistic people love to, iterate over what's happened before and sort of build upon that. And I feel like if you put me in an interview now, yes, the lights would distract me. Yes, if there's people walking around in the background, that would throw me completely. Yes, it takes me a while to think of the answer to a question unless I have the question in a bit in advance. I've had those questions not in advance, but I've had them before, and I've had them before, and I've had them before. Now I feel in quite a strong place. And similarly, because we've gone, to this sort of online world because of what's happened recently, you can do over the phone interviews, you can do Skype interviews, like welcome and then acknowledge like the changes that have gone in the world. They've inadvertently acknowledged a lot of the things that autistic people struggled with and made that process better. And I think things have gotten better, and I definitely felt the benefits from the changes.
Ros, what barriers do you feel like you've encountered as an autistic person in your career path?
So I think one of the first barriers for me is knowing what job I wanted to go into. So I went to university because it was the last year of low fees, because fees were tripled after my year, and I chose the subjects that were interesting to me. And then I finished university and I didn't know what to do. And I was quite interested in art and quite interested in therapy. So I was like, maybe I'll be an art therapist. So the first thing to do is do an art foundation. So I did another course. And then after that, I was like, but how do I find a job? And I was looking at these jobs and I was like, I don't know where my skills match into this. And because my brain works in quite a simple way, I was like, I can't do that. And then like I'd chat to my mum and she'd be like, oh no, but you have this transferable skill, so you probably could do that. And I was like, but I don't know how to put that across. And like no one's ever like sat down and gone through that. And, I was lucky I had family, but even then I got a job in customer service, and I worked in customer service for 3 years, and I did voluntary roles where I was doing a lot of other things, and I was also doing a lot of other things in the role I was in, but I couldn't find a way to get paid for it because the money wasn't the motivator for me. It wasn't like I was like, oh yeah, I want to make loads of money. It was like, I want to do things that are interesting, and so I'll just do them. But then that had a detrimental effect on my personal life because I didn't have a lot of money. Yeah, managing life was difficult in that period, which is one of the ways I found occupational therapy. But even then, I still look at a lot of the workplaces and go, those aren't set up for me. And I am either going to have to fight to make it set up for me, or I'm going to have to try and find a workplace that is.
What other barriers do you think autistic people encounter?
So I think there's knowledge, experience and skills. So it's not knowing where to access the knowledge, experience and skills, not knowing if you have them. But also there's a lot of suggestion that you go into volunteering, but volunteering can be quite a daunting step. And also volunteering doesn't get you any money. So how do you make money in the meantime? Another barrier can be about not knowing about certain careers. So I recently trained as an occupational therapist. Did I know what an occupational therapist was when I was younger? No. There's a lot more coming out of jobs fairs in schools, but even then, I think I just wouldn't have engaged at school. I think they need to find ways to make careers more engaging in schools.
I think also there's this thing, isn't there, where sometimes autistic people can take a little bit longer or a non-sort of straightforward path through the education system and maybe find themselves a little bit later on considering their career choices, which is actually a barrier on its own because the workplace is so competitive, and if you're a little bit older, it can be harder to get taken seriously or given those opportunities. What other barriers do you think autistic people face?
I think one of the challenges is that we fully throw our bodies into things when we get an interest or anything. So when we do look for a career, we might look for something that we have quite a fascination in. Like I got started in fashion promotion because I really liked fashion. And I jumped in thinking, because it's an interest that I know quite a lot about, I know about the brands, I know about the seasons, I know how it all works. I thought that'd be something that I could do really well in, but I didn't count for the fact that, once again, yes, I know this is stereotypical, but it's been quite gossipy, people can be quite sharp in fashion, and it just wasn't really a field for my kind of autism, for where I sit on the spectrum. And so I just had to get out after a while, and I think a lot of autistic people might fall into that similar trap, I guess.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think actually in some ways, the more competitive the industry, the less sort of pressure there is on the industry to be inclusive and to make accommodations. So for example, I am working at the moment for a well-known social media site, specifically as an autistic creator in a group of autistic creators. So you'd think this would be the ideal environment for an autistic person to thrive, but the accommodations are just not there at all. And if you kind of question that, it's like, well, okay, we can take you out of the program. There's someone else who happy to come and take your spot, because there's always the next person to come in. There's no reason for them to go out of their way to make it possible for you to work. And I think that's probably the case in lots of industries like theatre, dance, fashion, art, anything where it's like, well, if you don't like it, the next person can come along and take that place, right?
Yeah, and there's the other thing of workplaces are a lot more transitory now. You move in and out of workplaces and careers, so you might have a manager that's really good and then they leave and move on to something else. So you had support in place and then suddenly it's taken away. And so it's knowing, how you're going to make that support continue, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get a manager who doesn't understand your accommodations and your work gets worse, and that's one of the barriers that you face in terms of going in, is like, well, am I going to have a manager that sticks around? Am I going to have those accommodations that are going to stay? And so I think there's a lot more people who are trying to do self-employment stuff, which comes with a whole host of other challenges in terms of you have to manage a lot more of your own finances, your own HR, but on the other hand, you're in control of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. As a self-employed person, you'd kind of think that I was living the dream at home working as an autistic person, but I have executive functioning challenges that mean it's really difficult for me to stay organised, and then I have anxiety around the fact that it's really difficult for me to stay organised, so I'm not blissfully unorganised. I'm worrying about it but doing nothing about it, and I'm taking on all these different job roles. So yeah, it does give me the freedom to work exactly the way that I need to work, but I do still struggle to maintain the amount of workload I need to maintain in order to make it sustainable. There's kind of a culture now in office working. I want to talk specifically about this because I think it's a challenge for a lot of autistic people to do hot desking. And I think hot desking was the worst invention ever for autistic people, right? Have either of you ever worked in a situation where hot desking was a thing?
I work from home most of the time, but when you're in the office, you hot desk. And you do book a desk, so you can book the same desk every time if you're savvy and you know what days you're going to be in. But I don't remember what numbers relate to what desk, and there's no drawing to show me which number relates to what desk, so I never know what desk I'm booking. And so that feels very stressful. And also I have to take everything with me. And because I have to get the bus to work, that means carrying everything and having to deal with the bus timetables. And so, yeah, there are just a lot of difficulties around that. And I'd like to have things on my desk. I remember walking through my old workplace and you could tell whose desk was whose because of the pictures that were up. It just makes an area feel less personal. Each place has a different sound and a different seat. And sometimes the same places have different seats. And that is also not great.
I'd love it if there was more transparency in terms of how do I get this job, and then if I'm in this job, how do I progress through that career path, rather than it being kind of guesswork. So as a self-employed person, you're supposed to know how much to charge and how to get work, but nobody actually talks about how to get work or how much to charge, and you're somehow supposed to know, and it can feel a little bit like those unspoken neurotypical rules again, right, where you're like, everyone else seems to know how this works, but I've Googled and there's nothing there that tells me, and I don't know how they know. And it's really a parallel, isn't it, really, with the difficulties that we have around those unwritten social rules. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. There are so many things that you feel like you should know. And I find that when starting a job as well, it's like I go in and they do the induction and then you're like, but you haven't told me how to do the things that I'm supposed to do.
There's that horrible moment where you're going around asking people, or you trying to find out more, and then you sort of realise you probably have to at some point tell them that you're autistic, and it's like, who do you tell? Do you tell the company? Do you tell your manager? Do you tell your team? And I think that's a huge like moment in your career, deciding like how the company's going to view you, and you've got to really take everything in your step at that point. I think a lot of autistic people don't know how to approach the subject of disclosing in the office, and they don't even know when to do it. Like, you could do it for the interview process to make it a lot easier, so that they're prepared on your first day for the onboarding. But then, maybe they'll look down on you for some reason, or they might think that you're going to take things too literal and it's going to affect your work. So you've really got to judge when and where you're going to do it.
Disclosing your diagnosis at work can be one of the really challenging aspects of starting a new job. What's your experience been of disclosing, and how would you suggest people might want to do that?
So my experience has been quite varied. I mean, I got my diagnosis just after university, and I didn't disclose in my first job for a few weeks because I was also attending this post-diagnostic group that was really useful in terms of making me understand my diagnosis more. And through that, I kind of thought about a way of thinking about disclosure that was really useful. So thinking about who I was disclosing to, because everyone you disclose to has a different relationship to you, whether it's, you're disclosing to a family member, you're disclosing to a friend, you're disclosing to a work colleague, you're disclosing to a random person on the street, you're disclosing like online. And so I'd put that who first, and then I think, well, why do I want to disclose to them? And everyone you disclose to, you have different reasons to disclose. So in a workplace, there are quite a few different reasons why you might disclose. It might be for accommodations. It might be so someone understands you more. You might want to be an advocate for, other autistic people in the organisation as well. And that why helps inform what you disclose to them.
Autism is like so much more common than people realise, and saying that there are other people in organisations who probably are also having the same feelings as you. They want to disclose, but they don't quite know when and how they're going to do it. I think it's a really interesting time because we're almost at like the forefront of this, where autistic people really are getting employed. Like, it can definitely be better, don't get me wrong, it can definitely get better, but like, we're making ourselves known, we're making the skills and the talents and the positives we bring known. That can only be done if you do disclose. So the fact that you can come forward and go, yes, I'm autistic, maybe it's an awkward conversation at first, but then everything you do and everything you bring from there on proves what we're capable of. And then the next people who come in, they probably won't be that scared to say it. They probably won't be that nervous and worried about what people might think, because they've already experienced it. So you got to push forward, not just for yourself, but for all of us.
Yeah, I agree. And while I don't think that everyone has a responsibility to represent autism in their workplace, I definitely think that if you can, it's an absolutely helpful thing to do. And even better if you can provide like educational materials, or even start a neurodiversity network, so that the culture of the workplace becomes a place where people know about autism and know autistic people, and it kind of becomes demystified, if you like. So many autistic people feel more comfortable if they've got kind of a plan of how they're going to approach a new project. And this can absolutely apply to either changing job roles or looking for a new job. From an OT perspective, what advice would you give to an autistic person who's in that position?
So I think start with figuring out where your skills lie is really good, and not just sitting there and doing that yourself, but talking to friends, family. If you've had university tutors who you were close with, chat to them. If you have volunteered anywhere, or if you've, if you're in a social group, like, talk to people who know you and ask them what they think your skills are. If you're not sure of what area to go in, think about the things that you're interested in and things that like motivate you, and look at jobs in that area. There are always jobs fairs that can be a useful way to kind of meet employers and find out about things, but can also be quite stressful in terms of sensory-wise. So I'd more suggest like contacting people in workplaces that you think you might be interested in, and asking about shadowing, or asking about just having a meeting and chatting about what the job role is. And if you're looking at doing some extra training, like go along to a university open day, or contact the university and see if you can speak to someone who's done the course before, to find out whether it is a good fit. And I think that's a really good place to kind of start off on your journey, if that's where you are.
I heard some advice recently that I thought was really useful, to kind of look at it from the other way around. So to think about what you need your life to look like as an autistic person, and then work backwards to what your job situation would be in order for your life to look like that, as a way of planning your career path, and I thought that was really interesting. James, what would you say are the things that you found useful in terms of figuring out how to get a new job or how to change career path?
I think it's a lot of some of the things that Ross said, that you have to have that self-understanding, and that can be quite difficult at first when you don't know where to look. I think there are ridiculous job recommendations online, you know, where you put in all your details and it says you'd be a great kickboxer for a living or something like that. But I think they're really valuable because in answering the questions, you do actually get the answers are rubbish, but like the method that it takes you to get there, you really have to sort of be quite introspective and learn more about yourself and realize what makes you tick. And that can kind of spur you in the direction of where you want to go.
So I think some autistic people have really obvious strengths or interests that can directly lead into a career path. But in my case, my great strength, I think, is being a really great verbal processor who can explain things to people in a way that makes it easy for them to understand. And you don't really realise that you've got that skill when you're in school or at university. So to find that as my skill and the career that I've gone into kind of just happened by accident. So I was wondering, Ros, is there a way that you can look at that strength-based approach to finding a career?
I think there are a few different ways to do it. I think talking to the people around you would kind of be my first step, but also trying different things. And that can be through volunteering is a really good way to try different things. And there are lots of different places that you can volunteer at that can be quite low stress in a way. I mean, it can always be stressful to start a new role, but I've always found volunteering is really nice because you don't have that pressure of a job. So something like that can be really useful. But also just going online and trying out some of those skills questionnaires. It doesn't always give you the best answer, but, you know, just asking yourself those questions can be useful.
Okay, so once you've figured out what your strengths are and what your career path is going to be, and you've got that job and you've figured out your accommodations, the next big challenge is how to communicate that you need those accommodations and make sure that they're implemented, which can be really challenging for us. James, have you got any advice for people on how to do that?
I think if you do struggle in those social situations, a great way around it is to take it online, take it through an email, write down what you want to say and get it bullet pointed and just send it out. Just make your thoughts clear and explain why you're saying what you're saying and what benefit it'll have to the company, not just benefit to you and benefit to the team. And just make sure that you've really sort of hammered in why you're saying this, and it's not just something that you think would be a nice to have, it's something that it's almost a necessity if you want to see everything improve all around it.
Have you got any advice for people who need to advocate for themselves in the workplace?
I'd maybe go with writing some bullet points of what you want to talk about and then booking a meeting. And then in that meeting, you go, well, this is my agenda. So you're aware of my agenda and this is what we're going to talk about, because personally, I'm also a bit of a verbal processor, and so talking through something, I do like writing things out, but it doesn't matter to me what the outcome is when someone reads it. But something like advocating for yourself, how someone reads it matters, and so I'm like, actually, I want to check in with you that you have understood what I meant when I said that.
I think for me, part of overcoming like apprehension about asking for those accommodations is sort of overcoming my own internalized ableism, in that when you've got an invisible disability and perhaps you've spent part of your life feeling like maybe you just need to try harder, recognizing that it's okay to ask for accommodations and really feeling comfortable with that is a really great first step to being in a strong position to ask for those accommodations. So if you found this video helpful, please like the video, consider subscribing to the channel and check out the description box for more information.